Welcome to The Space Between, and today my guest is the one and only Jill Lewis. So we decided to call this podcast episode Two Generations, Two Breakups, and One Honest Conversation. And I have notes with me today that I probably will read because I am just as nervous as I'm guessing my mother is. So bear with us as we have some really honest, raw talk. Today, I'm sitting down with the one person who knows all too well the impact divorce has on family, my mom. She's been through divorce herself, and then decades later, she watched me go through mine. Jill D. Lewis isn't just my mother. You know from the minute you talk with her that she is a force, a woman who rebuilt, redefined, and refused to let life's hardest moments define her. With a degree from Penn State University, she's now the Chief Development Officer at Signature Wealth Strategies, where she helps people make some of life's toughest financial decisions. She's also the chairman of, I can name like 4 or 5 boards. She's an active member of Rotary. She serves on a steering committee for students. Anyway, she's like the mayor of my hometown. We used to joke that she should have run for mayor. Proudly known as Sassy to her 8 grandchildren, my mom, Jill Lewis, was raised in New York, but has been a Florence, South Carolina resident, community advocate, and powerhouse for her entire professional career, which really started the day after she and my dad got divorced. She is remarried to Dr. Joseph Lewis, and my mom has 3 children, my 2 brothers, and her very favorite daughter, me, because I am her only daughter. Like I said, she's got 8 amazing grandchildren, 3 of mine. And today we're talking about the unique journey that we both experienced that gave us this incredible, beautiful family. She has spent her career guiding others through change. Today we're talking about her own. What was it like to watch her only daughter navigate a path that she once walked herself? How did her divorce shape the way that I saw love, commitment, marriage, resilience? And what happens when 2 generations sit down to talk about it? Not just about divorce, but the emotional legacy that it leaves behind. This is, I think, also about heartbreak and healing and hard truths that none of us who have ever experienced separation and divorce want to talk about out loud. There's a whole lot of taboo, but I'm ready to have this conversation with the one person who's been through it all, my mom. Welcome to The Space Between. So here we go, Mom.
Okay.
I'm ready to go back if you're ready to go back, but it's going to be tough.
I guess I'm ready.
Okay. I don't actually know if I'm ready either, but we're going to see what happens.
I might cry.
I might too. We didn't have any tissues handy, but we're going to make that happen for sure. I want to ask you like the big question of what, if you had to like give an elevator speech on what it was like to, what you remember most about your own divorce from my father, what would you say?
I think I would start off by saying you and I are both hopeless romantics. I mean, you go on as saying you are a marriage-loving divorce attorney, but that's because we try to see life as happy and loving and caring.
She's already tearing.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying not to do that. So your question was, what did I learn from my own divorce? I learned how to do things differently. I learned how to, if there's a volatile personality, how to smooth it down, how to make it easy, how to create forgiveness. The one thing that I really wanted to change was to remove the volatility from the side of my children. That really bugged me because I thought it would have a detrimental ending, and it was a volatile relationship, and I did realize. I knew right from the beginning it was going to be volatile. And there was, when you fall in love with somebody, it's kind of hard to pull out the pieces that you don't want to be there. So I learned that I didn't want to pull them out. I had to deal with them.
And what was your first reaction when I told you that I was going to also get divorced?
I was devastated. I was really devastated.
Why?
I was worried.
Well, did you see it coming? Do you feel like you saw it coming?
Yeah, I saw you moving away, and that bothered me, and I couldn't move. I couldn't physically or mentally move you back. But in essence, I thought you and Ron were, that you were good partners, you were good business partners, you developed, and you came into Charlotte, which is a fairly big city, and made a name for yourselves as development, historical development. And I thought that was wonderful. I mean, I really enjoyed what you two put together. I thought there was a chance that I could help save the marriage.
So, but what were you most worried about during that time? Because that was all very optimistic and very supportive, and I thank you for it. So what were you most worried about? For me, as your daughter, what were you most worried about? Maybe that's a better question.
I thought possibly in my life, I thought I made a mistake the first time, and I thought maybe you were making that same mistake, and I wanted you to be able to see the whole picture, and I couldn't make that happen.
So, so you saw your story in my story.
Yeah, more or less. And I saw my mistakes. You know, we're all human. We make mistakes, and we try to figure out how we made them, why we made them, how we rectify them, and that's not always so easy when it encompasses a whole family. And to make it even worse, when we go back, I have a very big family. I was literally the first divorce, which is not what I ever thought. I thought I'd have this perfect marriage.
Did you feel helpless watching me go through it?
Yeah. Well, nothing. I used to be able, previous to this, to make you look at a whole picture and talk to me and feel differently, and I couldn't make that happen. I just couldn't get you to look at the whole picture. Not that my picture was right, but I felt like I couldn't get you to look at it.
How do you think your divorce impacted or influenced the way that I approached relationships or how I handled my own separation?
I think my divorce you know, right from the beginning, I will tell you, and the world, you were smarter than I was when you were born. So you had a million questions even as a young child, and I could see you formulating ideas and determinations much younger than you should have. I would, on my first date after your dad, and you met this gentleman, you looked at him and you said to me, and I'm just trying to describe you at 7, 8 years old, you said to him, I didn't expect you to look like a grandfather. That was your first thing you said.
Well, he did look like a grandfather.
I know, you were right. It's just most people don't say it out loud, except you were 7. And the other thing is we walked out the door and you looked at him and you said, you put your finger up and you said, no more children. So I was like dealing with a 40-year-old. I wasn't like dealing with, you were so totally different than the other kids. You really looked at things much more maturely.
But you didn't. You shared with me early on in my separation, and I'm curious how your mother handled it with you when you went through your divorce. So when I initially decided that I wasn't in the healthy and loving marriage that I felt like was right and best for me, and that it was going to impact far more than just me. And you really encouraged me to stay in. And one of the things that surprised me the most was you didn't think that I could even do life, do work without that person as my partner. Like, for me, it felt like you were saying I wasn't enough. For me, it felt like you were saying you can't do it without this man in your life. And that really struck hard for me. I remember I was getting out of the car one day. I was actually at a donation site. I don't know why I remember that, but you said to me, I don't know if anyone will ever love you as much as he loves you. So I'm curious, how did your mom handle it? Did she push you to stay? Did she make you believe, like, is it a generational thing? Is it a man-woman thing? Is it like, I didn't understand that this powerhouse of a mom was telling me that you were afraid I wasn't going to be able to do it without him.
Which is so, I mean, I did do that. You're absolutely correct. But to me, when I look at the whole picture now, I always believed you could do anything you wanted to and would and were totally capable of it. I was worried about the whole picture, the kids. I mean, I was just worried about it. What did my mom do? Nothing. I was the first divorce in the family. My mother, who was very smart, I mean, I don't remember her saying anything to me. My father flew down to talk to me and to talk to your father and to see if he couldn't fix things.
So isn't that so interesting? Because I described moments in my marriage as volatile, unhealthy. Our conflict was really difficult. The way we handled conflict was really difficult. I always described your marriage, and I hear you describing your marriage as very similar, but yet both of our parents were encouraging us to stay in that relationship. That's interesting to me. Do you think that's interesting? The parallels?
It
like,
is.
But why would we do that to our children? Why would we say, yes, this is unhealthy. Yes, this is volatile. Yes, there are a whole bunch of things that don't work, that aren't healthy, that we don't want our children to experience or see. But why would we drive or try to inspire them to stay? Why do we do that?
You know, when I left New York and came to South Carolina and ended up staying, I became a relatively independent woman. I told you as you were growing up, never depend on a man. If you want something, you better be able to purchase it yourself or figure out how to get it, because I didn't have, I guess I didn't have the relationship where I felt like somebody had to buy me everything I wanted or everything I thought I needed or whatever. You know, you went out on your own early on in your law career, and you did very well. But I was afraid maybe that wouldn't continue, and I didn't want to see you not financially sound.
Why were you afraid it wasn't going to continue?
I don't know. Because nobody knows the future, and you can't depend on things just because. I mean, I think if anybody had told me I was going to move to the South the year I moved to the South, and that I was going to be who I ended up being, I would have said you were crazy. Because women in the South don't do what I do. They're not empowered to be part of the man's world. And every board I was on, including the people I worked for, I was the only female. And I learned how to deal with that. I learned how to give them back what they gave me, or, figure out how to be on their same level. I had no idea that you could I knew you could do anything you want, but I really didn't know how it was going to go. And I was worried about you, and I knew you were going to have the kids, and I was worried about the children. You have to remember, when I went on my own, I had 3 children. I was not married. And there were times that you guys ate lunch and I didn't. And that was a terrible feeling. I mean,
Well, and I mean, we didn't talk about there were times when you separated that I remember being, 10, 12, and I would walk up the stairs of where we lived, and I would open the door to your room, and there would be a puff of cigarette smoke. You were 80 pounds, maybe. You were working an hourly rate job selling clothes. That someone had offered you a job until you could figure out what your next chapter was going to be. I know it was a rough time.
and I did not want you to go through that. That was literally.
But can you see now that our stories were different, that I wasn't going to be jobless or homeless? And
Well, now I can, but I couldn't then.
it's so interesting why you couldn't see it then.
I couldn't see it then. Or maybe I wouldn't allow myself to see it then because I didn't want you to get caught up like I did. I mean, it all turned out. I made my life. I created what I had to create to make sure you and your brothers had everything you wanted.
Well, so I want to talk about like the blended family that you created in the house, with my dad, because I really honor the way that you handled it before separation, and I learned a lot from it. And there's a passage in Please Don't Say You're Sorry, and it reads, "There were things in my childhood that felt normal until I was old enough to understand they weren't. When my mom and dad met, they were both divorced," which we didn't talk about that yet. "You each had 2 sons. I was the only child that they had together and the only girl. Strangely, I never saw myself as having a blended or non-traditional family, nor did I see our situation as different or unique. Our daily lives revolved around career, school, and community, with our weekends spent together. Most of my youth was spent as the only child at home, with one babysitter from 9 to 3 p.m. and another babysitter from 3 to 9 p.m. When my parents were there, I would hear, so the parts that I think are so incredible is like you guys came together and it felt so normal for me. I still to this day never saw my half brothers as half brothers. They were my brothers. And so I didn't even realize that wasn't normal until way later in life. But when my parents were there, I would hear the ripple effects of a relationship that was lustful, but also volatile and fraught with violence. At the points when the dysfunction would reach its heights, usually late at night, I would jump up and down on the floor above them in hopes that they would hear me and stop yelling. My parents loved each other in ways I only dreamed of experiencing as an adult, and hated each other in ways that I hadn't known possible. That combination of lust and violence resulted in what in today's generation we would call it domestic violence. Then we didn't call it anything. Do you see that difference in our generations of how people experience relationships then versus experiencing relationships now?
Yeah. I mean, it's so obvious now. And as far as the blended family, I agree with you. I never felt like it was blended. I loved all of the kids. I spent a lot of time creating a family, one family. I never thought we were different. And but on the other hand,
what was the kick? What was the trick to that? Because now I'm in a blended family, and it's not. I mean,
treating everybody the same, making sure that your own kids didn't think they were special or spoiled, or that they could get more than their step brothers. And I agree with you. I think I did a really good job of that because everybody. I mean, when I walked out of that relationship and I told your oldest stepbrother, Mark, it's a shame I can't take you and Derek with me, because I knew your father was not fit to bring up anybody. It wasn't his thing.
Well, fit has legal connotations, so we don't mean, right.
Yeah.
So fit, she doesn't mean it like that.
Right.
She thinks you basically are saying that you just thought you were going to be able to continue to provide this normal family for children that you had raised for the last decade, right?
Yeah, and I'm still, I know this is crazy. Obviously, they don't call me mom anymore, but they did, and I'm still close with both of them. You know, we really had a family unit. So it's, obviously different now, but my thing was to create a single family, for us to be just as normal as my parents and my brother and I, as a one-unit family.
One of the nights, I described this night in the book because it is definitely a night I will never forget. And there are a lot of things that I forget about my childhood that when I sit down with my childhood friends, they tell me about, and I say, did that really happen? Like, I don't remember that happening. And they remind me it did. But one of the nights I describe in the book, one of the nights most clearly etched in my memory occurred when I was 8 years old. I spent it with my babysitter, whose name was Roberta. We were looking out the big picture window of our home. Joby's arms were wrapped tightly around me as I stood horrified, watching my father feverishly drive our family van around the circular driveway in front of our house, with my mother hanging on to the driver's side window, clinging for life. While I listened to them yelling at each other, my dad drove closer to the house, dragging my mother's backside through prickly bushes. She was apologizing, begging forgiveness, and he was cussing like a sailor. I wondered what was so bad that she was making herself go along for that ride. Did she have an affair? Was she apologizing to prove her love? And what did my dad think he was doing by hurting her like that? And in hindsight, I can say it was some of those apologies that actually made me want to title the book, Please Don't Say You're Sorry. So what was your perspective on that night? Because my guess is you remember it too.
I actually don't remember the actual thing that he was mad at me for. That night I was trying to take the volatility outside, away from inside the house. I don't even remember you and Gilberto standing at the front door watching, and I was trying to calm him down, and I knew I thought he would not hurt me. I mean, he wanted to make me crazy, or I think he wanted to make me crazy, so I would be afraid that he was going to. But I actually really knew that he wouldn't, and that he loved to hear me beg. And I did.
So, okay, first of all, if you have a babysitter that is sitting there observing, like, we need to, to me, like, one of the elephants in the room is the babysitter should not be holding on to the child watching the conflict, right?
Right.
The other elephant in the room is avoiding the conflict in the presence of your children, even the noise and the sound. Like, to me, those were some of those lessons that I took into my generation, because I remember those things so vividly. And and so that is something that I think I brought, that it's a repeat, but I saw it in real time and was like, no, I am not going to do this to my children. I am not going to let them hear the yelling or the screaming or anything that's volatile. And there was so much that I learned about that. So that was one of those things that I took from it. In fact,
do you remember the night he flicked his cigarette on your hair?
No, but somebody reminded me of that last year, 2 years ago.
It was Adam. Adam and I were standing there, and I literally almost tried to kill him. I mean, you had this, obviously long, thick, blonde hair. And
he being my father.
He being your father took a lit cigarette and flicked the ash right on the top of your head. If it had caught, I would have literally.
So what were the consequences of that?
The consequences of that in my mind, was to do the best I could to keep his volatility measured and down.
So I would say to my clients, are you going to be there all the time to protect your children from something like that happening?
And it shocked me how he could get to me the fastest and be really nasty and upset me. And a lot of things that happened during our divorce, which you wouldn't remember, he would make you upset to make me upset.
That's what you believed.
That's what
I mean, I
believed.
do want to point out that Dad's not here to defend himself. He is still my dad. I wouldn't be here without the man. And I, and my perspective of that was as shocking as your perspective of that. But we don't know what his intentions were. I think for me, it's just recognizing, what do we do as parents? If I called you as the grandparent of my 3 children and said, you're not going to believe what just happened, whatever detail, somebody flicked a cigarette in my kid's hair. Let's say that's what happened. What would you do? What advice would you give me?
Well, after you make sure the cigarette was not going to burn the head, I would say, what caused it? What started the volatility? Where were you? What were you talking about? I mean, you have to get, as we have said our entire lives in business, you have to get to the root cause. And if you can stop the root cause, you can maybe measure to keep the volatility as quiet as you can. I want to say one other thing. I know you probably won't remember this either. After we're going through the divorce, and you and I were in his office, and you were 7'8" at the time, and I walked into his office for some reason. I mean, I would never have just showed up, and he started to yell at me. And I remember specifically you, being this young lady, grabbed my belt and you said to me, "Mother, we are finished here." And you pushed me out the back door. So, very early on, you had a better sense of getting away from the measured volatility that you knew was going to happen before I did. I always wanted to make it better. I always wanted to smooth it down. You didn't want any part of it.
So it's fascinating to me. My mother and I are almost exactly 30 years apart. So when I'm 7, she's 37. And so when you talk about how we remember things, I mean, obviously there's a time delay on the way we remember them, but I'm always so fascinated at how that there are these little details that come up and how they stick with you. Do you think there's any difference now between the 2 generations, fast forward, the 2 generations, and what advice you would give what advice would you give me now versus what you would have given me then?
The 2 generations are totally different. You have to realize or remember, we never used therapists. That wasn't even a word that came up. We didn't seek outside help, which I think couples and people look at their children, make sure they don't have any really true hang-ups that have to be addressed, or things are different.
A hang-up
in school.
meaning like a mental illness?
Yeah. Well, not necessarily a mental illness, but something that really bothers them, that could create a mental block or something that would change their personality. We didn't use therapists, and today it's much more sought after, it's much more accepted. People, you and George talk about everything. I couldn't talk to your father. There was no calm. If I started a conversation and it wasn't going in my mind, it wasn't going his way, it would get volatile. I'd have to walk out. We couldn't finish. Totally different understanding and working relationship between husbands and wives today.
Do you think that's generational, or do you think that's the people we choose?
I think it's generational. I think people are trained differently now. They see the pitfalls and the potholes, and if it's important enough to them, they try to fix it.
I want to talk about this whole idea about apologies, because I definitely think that when we compare generations, one of the things we do, and I always say especially as women, and especially it's something I see that you do, is you apologize for a lot of things that we're not sorry for. And so in the book, I talk about the apologies that come up for us, particularly as women. I wrote, personally, unless I was digging deep and had genuine remorse, I tended to use the word sorry in the way that I had learned from my mother as a means to reduce conflict, which is kind of what you said earlier, right? There's no doubt that her generation of baby boomer women are known to apologize for everything. It is often used in an attempt to spare a repeat performance of the conflict. I was, for a time, guilty as charged. I apologized for everything. So what are your thoughts on apologies now?
There would have to be a situational difference. I mean, I can't just say...
Okay, when you and because you're remarried, as I said at the beginning, so when he is upset with you, which we're all human, do you start with an apology, or do you, like, what do you do now?
I do. I say, I'm
Damn
sorry. I'm sorry.
I said, woman, have you learned nothing? I wrote a book called Please Don't Say You're Sorry.
I know, but you have to remember, my husband is 10 years older than I am. We're talking generational. So when there's something that he doesn't like, or happened or upset him at this particular age, I do look at him and say, I'm sorry, I didn't know that was going to make you so angry or so sensitive, and let me explain what my feelings are. Years ago, I would have probably said, I'm sorry, and walked out the room. But today, it's, communication is so much more important than we realized years ago. So, yeah, I even though I know it's not my fault, at his age, he understands the fact that I'm apologizing not only for me, but for him too. And many times he will say to me, really, thanks, but I know it was my fault, which would never have happened 20 years ago. So
when I was going through my separation, and I know that apologies come up in lots of different forms and for lots of different reasons, but I remember there were nights. Now, this was a generational difference, but I thought it was really, and I think I write about this in the book too, when things weren't good in my marriage before I separated, and we would be in an argument, and I typically would call you, bawling, falling apart, alone. You would say, inevitably, almost every time, call him, tell him you're sorry, tell him you love him, and ask him to come home. Moms try to fix their daughters' problems, but also could my marriage have ended up differently if I hadn't have apologized, or if there, I don't know. I ask myself the questions a lot too, because I am such a different human now, and I think that's actually what is so interesting about what I do for in my practice. That in order to have a really healthy marriage, you have to recognize that the people we marry are not going to be the same people when you have children together, when you have death in the family, when you have job changes. Like, we're all going to evolve and shape and learn differently, experience things differently. But can you do it together? Or are you going to take such drastic turns that you won't ever communicate in a way that's effective or healthy, right?
Right.
Well, and that's one of those communication things. So are you capable? I think this is a really big lesson on conflict too. And we experience it in our practice all the time. So I got a message yesterday from a client, and she said, I've just been threatened. It wasn't physical threat, but it was, I've been threatened that this thing is going to happen. I need to speak with you immediately. Okay, realistically, like, it's not going to happen immediately. It's not something that's going to happen immediately. So, like, that pause, that response, that space between that I like to describe is so critical in so many ways. So, that ability to communicate and recognize, all right, I have to put space between this stimulus and this response in order to know what's best.
And there's a lot of times that, yes, you do, but you know, my final conversation at the end of having always said I was sorry, it was my fault, let's, not take this any further, at the very end of my relationship with your father. And he was at the house trying to make me change my mind. And I said to him, no, he said to me, you have no idea who I am. You will be nothing without me. He said, I am who this town knows. He said, you have nothing here. And I looked at him, instead of saying, I'm sorry, and trying to figure out, I said, listen, I don't think you have any idea who you married. So let's just go away and be friends, and we'll see where life takes us. Because at that point, I was not going to say, I'm sorry.
But why in the hell would you want to be friends with somebody who had been so disrespectful to you and been in this volatile relationship and want to see you cry, or at least that's the way it made you felt? Like, why do we want to be friends with people that don't treat us with respect?
And I'll tell you why. And I have a really good reason why.
If you say me.
No,
okay,
I brought
thank God.
all three of you up to love family, truly, to respect, to love family.
No matter what.
Yeah, no matter what. And if I couldn't have an okay conversation with your father, it would have messed you up forever.
Well, that takes a ton of emotional maturity.
Yeah.
And it also requires that
And I hated him.
Well, but it also requires that both parents have emotional maturity. And so, that's been something really difficult in my divorce, that the inability to communicate effectively with my children's dad has made a really drastic impact on lots of things. It's made it really, really hard.
I just think at that point in time, you have to think about every single thing that comes out of your mouth, so it can't be, oh, she said this and she said. You have to just make sure that what you say and what you feel sort of work together, and that the other person who is non-communicative understands and can relate to you without yelling. That does not happen. I feel terrible. I tried everything in my power to be friendly with your ex-husband. Truly, I did. Every time we saw him, I walked in his direction. I made the kids tell him I was there or behind, as did Joe. He would have absolutely nothing to do with us, and that's still the case, because I know it's reflecting on his relationship with the children, and I know that will reflect on them for the rest of their lives. And I can't, God, my father told me right at the beginning, if you can't fix something, turn around, walk away, and learn how to live with it. And that's basically where I am. And I try to do twice as much for your children so that they don't miss anything.
That's, it's interesting for lots of different reasons. It's interesting. And he, and because I was raised to have that value around family, I contacted his brother, sister, the only relatives he had, and I think I received a letter that said that I'm harassing them instead of me just trying to stay connected to them because I see them as my boys' family. And so I think, again, I think it comes with, you have to be able to show grace. Because I have so much conflict with this idea, because you have to, like, we're all humans. And when a relationship doesn't end the way you think it's going to end, or a relationship doesn't grow the way you think it's going to grow, at what point do you recognize that you just have to give someone grace and show compassion, and that there are things that are out of your control, versus I'm cutting this person out because of the way they treated me? I mean, I really struggle with this whole concept.
There is no point that you can fix it, and there's no point that you can make somebody understand how you feel and why you feel that way. And that's what I was referring to. If you can't, no matter what you do, if you can't fix it, you just have to learn how to live with it. And maybe in 5 years or 10 years, the situation will occur. I would like you to do is make sure your children understand the wall that was put up, that was not created by your family. I mean, I really want them to understand that we did everything we could to make it easier for them with relationships, where we could actually, as I do with your father, if we're at a party, or I walk over and say hello, we have a communication, it's so much better for you. And I know that would be so much better for them if we could all communicate as a family, but he won't allow that. So, and that's not a thought, I know that. I would like that to change.
Well, I mean, I would like that to change too, but you can't make other
That's
people
what I
do
said.
what you want them to do, right?
Yeah. I mean, I said maybe 5 years or 10 years, or something terrible happens where we're actually thrown together because of an illness, etc., where we can, in front of the 3 boys, make a significant difference with what has happened over the last 10 years or 5 years with their dad.
Okay, so one of the things that I didn't appreciate about your divorce, and that I did not inherit as a pattern in mine, was you had me really involved in your divorce. Now, that's not, I've said this to you before, and sometimes.
And it's in your book.
And you get this martyr thing, like, well, I'm sorry, what else could I have done, right? Like, I appreciate the way that you feel when I say that out loud, because it's hard to say it out loud, but it is my truth, and so I have to say it out loud. I was far too intimately involved in my parents' separation and divorce. The good news is it made me one hell of a divorce lawyer, and I love what I do. I love putting marriages back together. I love creating opportunities for healthy separations, because I can't control when someone separates, but I do want to make sure that I'm encouraging them to take the right path for the sake of the children. The rest is business. But like, I did not inherit this pattern from you. I've been really steadfast in making sure to keep the children out of it to the extent possible. So in your perception, do you think that helped or hurt the way that I navigated my own divorce? Like, how did you experience it as a grandparent, as a parent, with regards to how involved? Because I remember one day, I'm sorry, I just got on a tangent. Like, one day I called you and I said, this is happening. And it was during COVID. This is happening. And you were essentially told me to make the decision, cut him out of it. It's not up to him. And I said, no, like, and you wanted me to tell the children what was really happening. Like, explain to them the truth. And I said, they're not capable. Their brains have not fully developed. I am not creating an opportunity to have them align with me. I don't think that's healthy. And I have lots of reasons why I think that's not healthy. But that was something that happened as I was a child. So I know that pattern creeps up, and I think that there are lots of clients that I've worked with over the last 2 decades that have involved their children too intimately. But what is your perspective on it now versus then?
I would not have done it any differently. You were a different kid. You weren't really a
You know
kid.
that's what people say when they do make these terrible mistakes, right? They go, but my kid's smarter than the rest of
No,
the kids.
but you were already emotionally, you were one of his objects of,
You believed.
yeah, that I thought, well, I had pretty good examples of the fact that you were one of his objects of hurt to hurt me. And so you were already involved. I mean, he would not leave you out of the, if you don't do this, this is what I'm going to do to her. Cut her. I mean, it was nothing physical. It was more. So I don't think there was any leaving you out of it. I left the boys out. I mean, I did not really involve any of the 4 boys. But you literally were part of it. And I know you said it wasn't good, but I think part of it, you placed yourself there. But I think your involvement gave you a better picture of your own divorce. Would I have done it differently? Maybe if I had more knowledge of divorce. I had no knowledge of divorce myself. My parents had no knowledge of divorce. I was coping with it on my own.
So I think coping strategies are really important. And I talk a lot with clients about making sure that they know what their coping strategies are, and as important, making sure they know what their children's coping strategies are, because how you react and respond to crisis is really, it's different for everyone. And so what do you think your coping, other than the plume of smoke that came out of your bedroom when I was little, what do you think your coping strategy was then? And what do you think mine is? Wait, I think I know what mine is. What do you think yours is?
My coping strategy at this point is just to basically sit back, analyze what just happened, why it happened, how it happened, and try to figure out how to either remove it or work with it to make it different. I got that from you because you analyze everything. And I remember telling you, you're making too much of it. Don't analyze every single hair follicle.
My brother would say things are only as big as of a deal as you make of it.
Yeah,
so,
right. Same thing.
Okay, so I see my coping strategies as really something very different, and I think it's changed for me over time. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I tell my clients this, is like what one person's coping strategy may be completely different from another. If I look to see the way that my 3 children and my 2 bonus children, what their coping strategies are when they're under stress, they're all very different, how they manage that. But you first are going to look to your parent to see what kind of, if you're going to be able to model their behavior. And so coping strategies are really important topics. And I feel like maybe that's a generational difference too, that in your generation, when people are experiencing divorce, that coping strategies are really different. One of the things that you said today that struck me was, I emphatically believe I was too intimately involved in your divorce. I turned out fine. I turned out better than fine, I think. I think it actually attributes to a lot of the way that I practice and the way that I handled my separation and the way that I handle my clients' situations. But that, to me, the fact that you said earlier, and I don't know if we caught this on camera, but you said I had no one else to talk to, so I talked to you. And I think that happens in a lot of scenarios. I think I have lots of clients, and I know a lot of people who would say that their parents talked to them because it was so private, because there was no one else to talk to. I don't think that's a great decision, because it shifts the weight of what you're experiencing onto your child. And I think there's actually, I don't know if you've ever heard of this, parentification, where in short, it makes the child feel like they're the parent. Kind of like when I pulled your belt out, mother, it's time for us to go. That's me being the parent in that situation. That's just a different lens to see it. And I'm so glad that we're talking about that today, because there is a different lens to see every single bit of what we've talked about. And I think it's neat to, look at how we handled it from a generational perspective, how we both handled it as moms and parents, and you now as a grandparent. Other things that I see that I think are also really clear in most family law cases